One way of thinking about a rigid family system would be just think about the Grand Canyon. So, if you were to go to that national park and you walked up to the edge, and then there was a 12-foot wall in front of you that prevented you from being able to see, you would ask for a refund. And that's essentially what happens in a lot of rigid family homes is they construct so many walls, so many rules, so many regulations that really prevent you from being able to explore the world around you. So that when you get a bad grade, when you say something that maybe you shouldn't have said, but more importantly, when you do something that really makes your mother or father wince because you're no longer protecting the things that are most dear to their idolatry, something in them turns against you. There is a particular rage, there's a glare, there might be a paddle, but it really could just be a look that is intended to kill. And what happens within these rigid family systems is that you need an escape. You need a way out of the tyranny of this rigidity. And so, what happens for so many people is that sexual brokenness actually gives them the first surrogate experience of freedom. That maybe you had a mother, a father, a religious organization that had so much control, so much just boundaries about what you thought, about what you watched, about what you engaged with your life. And something in you was angry. Something in you said, this can't possibly be what a family, what a church is supposed to look like. I need a taste of freedom. And so for many people, when they first see pornography, when they first have an experience of intercourse, that gives them this surrogate sense that this is actually the freedom that I want and no one else is going to know about this. And so what my research found was that if you grew up in a very rigid family system, that would actually have an impact on your life and the sexual brokenness that you pursued as an adult. So, what happens in rigid family systems is that they create fertile territory for anger to emerge. And so, I think part of the question that we need to ask ourselves is if you grew up in a very rigid system, where did all of that anger end up going? And if you don't have a place to begin to process that anger and that disappointment of that family system, it's going to show up in your sexual life. The other finding that Patrick Carnes found was that roughly 87% of people who were struggling with sexual addiction came from families that could be classified as disengaged. And so disengagement is essentially there were very few people in your world that actually saw your face. So when you go back to middle school, for so many of us, middle school is a prototype of hell. You were bullied, you were ridiculed, your hair was made fun of, your shirts were made fun of. And so in the midst of all the difficulty of what middle school was, part of the question would just be when you came home, and you had been in tears throughout the day. You had been feeling deeply ashamed about your body, about your life. Did you have a mother or a father whose eyes could actually see that something in your face had changed? Or was your mom far too interested in making sure that the house looked immaculate? Maybe she was vacuuming. Maybe she was cleaning the counters for the third time that day. Maybe you had a father who was deeply committed to work. Maybe he was a good man, could be an elder in your church. He went to a few of your games, but in the midst of some of the heartache of your life, he chose to look the other way. What happens with disengagement is that you have this profound sense that your heartache, the deepest waters of your heart, will have no engagement. And so what ends up happening for these people is that you begin to realize that intimacy is not found within the family system. It's found outside of one. And so clients that I know who deeply struggle with lust almost always report coming from families that were highly disengaged. They learned that they needed to go outside of their family in order to find eyes that were willing to meet them. And so, what I hope you see in all of this is really the deep emptiness and pain that informs so much of the sexual brokenness that's happening in our life today. So, what's really important for us to grapple with is that sexual brokenness is certainly about lust, but that's not all it's about. So, one of the things that I would invite you to think about is, did you tend to come from a very rigid home? Did you come from a disengaged home? You could have certainly come from a home that was both rigid and disengaged. And so, at the heart of the struggle for someone who comes from a rigid family is really this issue of anger. What do you do with all the hypocrisy, with all of the misuse and the coercion of power that you've seen? The core issue for people who come from disengaged family systems is really the issue of lust. You always feel like you are searching the world for someone to come and find you in order to get out of some of the heartache that you're experiencing. And so one of the reasons why I think sexual brokenness is so appealing to so many of us is that it appeals to some of the deepest waters in our hearts. Sexual brokenness essentially gives people the invitation. It says, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Who else says that? Jesus. But the reality of sexual brokenness is that it's not just about lust, and we have to understand that. Sexual brokenness is also about the issue of anger. And so in the midst of all of the heartache of our life, where do you take your anger? And one of the reasons why pornography can become so appealing to us is that it gives us a place to use another human being. I might be experiencing rejection in my marriage, rejection in a career, a level of loneliness as a man. And yet, part of what pornography says is there is someone else out there who can be on film that will subordinate themselves according to the deepest and darkest desires in your heart. And so I think part of what we have to grapple with is that both sexual brokenness and Jesus appeal to the deepest desires within the human heart, but only one offers us freedom.